The Odyssey, the digest, the summary of the poem. Type of work, poem. Author, Homer, 9th century BC. Type of plot, heroic, epic. Time of plot, years immediately following Trojan War. Locale, Greece and Mediterranean lands. First transcribed 6th century BC. Principal characters: Odysseus, the wandering hero of the Trojan War; Penelope, his faithful wife; Telemachus, his son. Critique: such a wealth of material has grown around the name of Homer that the legendary blind bard might just as well himself be included in the Greek pantheon of gods about whom he wrote so well. The Iliad, an epic poem concerned with an incident of the Trojan War, and the Odyssey, concerned with Odysseus' difficulties in getting home after the war, had been won by the Greeks, are the great epic masterpieces of Western literature and a storehouse of Greek folklore and myth. The Odyssey, with its sagacious and always magnificent hero, its romantic theme, and its frequent change of scene, has enjoyed greater popularity through the ages than has the Iliad. The story. Of the Greek heroes who survived the Trojan War, only Odysseus had not returned home, for he had been detained by the god Poseidon because of an offense that he had committed against the god of the sea. At a conclave of the gods on Olympus, Zeus decreed that Odysseus should be allowed at last to return to his home and family in Ithaca. The goddess Athene was sent to Ithaca, where in disguise she told Telemachus, Odysseus' son, that his father was alive. She advised the youth to rid his home of the great number of suitors suing for the hand of his mother Penelope, and to go in search of his father. The suitors refused to leave the house of Odysseus, but they gave ready approval to the suggestion that Telemachus begin a quest for his father, since the venture would take him far from the shores of Ithaca. The youth and his crew sailed to Pylos, where the prince questioned King Nestor concerning the whereabouts of Odysseus. Nestor, a wartime comrade of Odysseus, advised Telemachus to go to Lacedaemon, where Menelaus, who resigned there as king, could possibly give him the information he sought. At the palace of Menelaus and Helen, for whom the Trojan War had been waged, Telemachus learned that Odysseus was a prisoner of the nymph Calypso on her island of Ogygia in the Mediterranean Sea. Meanwhile, Zeus sent Hermes, the messenger of the gods, to Ogygia with orders that Calypso was to release Odysseus. When the nymph reluctantly complied, the hero constructed a boat in 4 days and sailed away from his island prison. But Poseidon, ever the enemy of Odysseus, sent great winds to destroy his boat and to wash him ashore on the coast of the Phaeacians. There he was found by Nausicaa, daughter of King Alcinous of the Phaeacians, when she went down to the river mouth with her handmaidens to wash linen. The naked Odysseus awoke, saw Nausicaa and her maidens, and asked them where he was. Frightened at first by this stranger hiding behind the shrubbery, Nausicaa soon perceived that he was no vulgar person. She told him where he was, supplied him with clothing, and gave him food and drink. Then she conducted him to the palace of King Alcinous and Queen Arete. The royal pair welcomed him and, at his asking, promised to provide him with passage to his native land. At a great feast, the minstrel Demodocus sang of the Trojan War and of the hardships suffered by the returning Greeks, and Alcinous saw that a stranger wept during the singing. At the games which followed the banquet and songs, Odysseus was goaded by a young Phaeacian athlete into revealing his great strength. Later, at Alcinous' insistence, Odysseus told the following story of his wanderings since the war's end. When Odysseus left Ilium, he was blown to Ismaros, the Siconus city, which he and his men sacked. Then they were blown by an ill wind to the land of the Lotus Eaters, where Odysseus had difficulty in getting his men to live a slothful life of ease. Arriving in the land of the Cyclops, the one-eyed monsters who herded giant sheep, Odysseus and 12 of his men were caught by a Cyclops, Polyphemus, who ate the men one by one, saving Odysseus until last. But the wily hero tricked the giant into a drunken stupor, blinded him with a sharpened pole, and fled back to his ship. On an impulse, Odysseus disclosed his name to the blinded Polyphemus as he sailed away. Polyphemus called upon his father Poseidon to avenge him by hindering the return of Odysseus to his homeland. Odysseus's next landfall was Aeolia, where lived Aeolus, the god of the winds. Aeolus gave Odysseus a sealed bag containing all the contrary winds, so that they could not block his homeward voyage. But the crew, thinking that the bag contained treasure, opened it, releasing all the winds, and the ship was blown to the land of the Laestrygonians, half men, half giants, who plucked members of the crew from the ship and devoured them. Most managed to escape, however, and came to Aea, the land of the enchantress Circe. Circe changed the crew members into swine, but with the aid of the herb moly, which Hermes gave him, Odysseus withstood Circe's magic and forced her to change his crew back into men. Reconciled to the great leader, Circe told the hero that he could not get home without first consulting the shade of Tiresias, the blind Theban prophet. On the shore, Odysseus dug a deep pit and in it sacrificed sheep. Thereupon appeared spirits from Hades, among them the shade of Tiresias, who warned Odysseus to beware of danger in the land of the sun god. On his homeward way, Odysseus was forced to sail past the Isle of the Sirens, maidens who by their beautiful voices drew men to their death on treacherous rocks. By sealing the sailors' ears with wax, and by having himself tied to the ship's mast, Odysseus passed the Sirens safely. Next, he sailed into a narrow sea passage guarded by the monsters Scylla and Charybdis. Scylla's 6 horrible heads seized 6 of the crew, but the ship passed safely through the narrow channel. On the island of the sun god, Hyperion, the starving crew slaughtered some of the Hyperion's sacred cows, despite a warning from their leader. The sun god caused the ship to be wrecked in a storm, all the crew being lost but Odysseus, who was ultimately washed ashore on Ogygia, the island of Calypso. His story finished, Odysseus received many gifts from Alcinous and Arete. They accompanied him to a ship they had provided for his voyage to Ithaca and bade him farewell, and the ship brought him at last to his own land. Odysseus hid in a cave the vast treasure he had received from his Phaeacian hosts. The goddess Athene appeared to him and counseled him on a plan by which he could avenge himself on the rapacious suitors. The goddess, after changing Odysseus into an old beggar, went to Lacedaemon to arrange the return of Telemachus from the court of Menelaus and Helen. Odysseus went to the rustic cottage of his old steward Eumaeus, who welcomed the apparent stranger and offered him hospitality. The faithful servant disclosed the unpardonable behavior of Penelope's suitors and told how Odysseus's estate had been greatly reduced by their greed and love of luxury. Meanwhile, Athene advised Telemachus to leave the ease of the Lacedaemon court and return home. On his arrival, he went first to the hut of Eumaeus in order to get information from the old steward. There, Athene, having transformed Odysseus back to his heroic self, son and father were reunited. After pledging his son to secrecy, Odysseus described his plan of attack. Eumaeus and Odysseus, again disguised as a beggar, went to Odysseus's house, where a meal was in progress. Reviled by the suitors who had forgotten that hospitality to a stranger was a practice demanded by Zeus himself, Odysseus bided his time, even when arrogant Antinous threw a stool which struck Odysseus on the shoulder. Odysseus ordered Telemachus to lock up all weapons except a few which were to be used by his own party. The women servants were also to be locked in their quarters. Penelope questioned Odysseus concerning his identity, but Odysseus deceived her with a fantastic tale. When Eurycleia, ancient servant of the king, washed the beggar's feet and legs, she recognized her master by a scar above the knee, but she did not disclose his secret. Penelope planned an impossible feat of strength to free herself of her suitors. One day, showing the famous bow of Eurytus and 12 battle axes, she said that she would give her hand to the suitor who could shoot an arrow through all 12 axe handles. Telemachus, to prove his worth, attempted but failed to string the bow. One after another, the suitors failed even to string the bow. Finally, Odysseus asked if an old beggar might attempt the feat. The suitors laughed scornfully at his presumption. Then Odysseus strung the bow with ease and shot an arrow through the 12 axe hafts. Throwing aside his disguise, he next shot Antinous in the throat. There ensued a furious battle, in which all the suitors were killed by Odysseus and his small party. 12 women servants who had been sympathetic with the suitors were hanged in the courtyard. Penelope, in her room, heard what Odysseus, the erstwhile beggar, had done, and husband and wife were happily reunited after years of separation.